Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Adnastana. It is a pleasure to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio and continuing our journey of light and knowledge. Now, I know earlier this year, I told you that we would be doing more research style segments, and we're going to be continuing that today. You hear me say this a lot, but this is another one of those organizations that I'm really excited to be bringing you. If you recall, in an earlier segment of Points of Light Radio, I shed some light on an organization called the Order of the Patrons of Husbandry. While doing some further research on the Grange, as it's called, I stumbled across this organization. And like I said, I'm kind of excited to bring him to you because I can't believe I missed him in that time. And this sounds like a very unique organization. It's called the Sovereigns of Industry, right? You've probably never heard of them. They've faded into fraternal history, but they're like I said, I can't wait to bring them to you because they're a real standalone kind of unique organization, and they're like I said, you're going to be they're an organization that were ahead of their time. So let's go take a look at the Sovereigns of Industry, shall we? But as I always ask you, are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Well, then you just trim your lamp and you follow me, because this will be interesting. So, the Order of the Sovereigns of Industry was established in 1874. It was an American mutualist movement that targeted urban workers and attempted to end perceived social ills through the establishment of consumer cooperatives. Now, what is a consumer's cooperative? A consumer's cooperative is an enterprise owned by consumers and managed democratically. It has aims of fulfilling the needs and aspirations of its members. Cooperatives operate within the market system independently of the state and as a form of mutual aid oriented towards service rather than profit. Now, the Sovereign Order of Industry, their mission was directly inspired by the Order of the Patrons of Husbandry, or the National Grange, and you've seen them featured here before. And would be a good idea if you actually went back and reviewed that, because you give you an idea of what this organization was about. Now, when William W. Adams was elected National Master of the Grange in 1873, he called upon a former school chum of his named William H. Earl to take charge of Grange organizing activities in the state of Massachusetts. Now, here's the thing. The Patrons of Husbandry were an exclusively agricultural organizations with substantial strength in the rural states of the American West. However, when Earl arrived in Massachusetts, he found a completely different situation because Massachusetts was a manufacturing state at the time with only limited potential for the establishment of an agrarian organization. Now think of it. Massachusetts has changed dramatically today from that, haven't they? Now, Earl instead began to envision a new and parallel organization to the Grange, which attempted to unite American workers in the same manner that the Grange united farmers. Now, Earl organized a meeting in January of 1874 in Springfield, Massachusetts, with people he'd met there who seemed to like his idea for a new workers' mutual aid organization. 15 people responded to Earl's convention call. They worked for a week, and drafted a constitution for this new organization, and the Order of Sovereigns of Industry was formed. Now, the Sovereigns of Industry was governed by a national council. It was headed by Earl, and he was the group's president. A set of rituals was adopted, and the Sovereigns of Industry chose to copy the Grange's structure as a secret society. There were a total of 60 members from 8 states in the District of Columbia at the time of its foundation in 1874, including 21 women. So women, here's the thing, women were prominent in the Sovereigns of Industry right from its very inception, okay? So it was ahead of its time, right? Now, William H. Earl published an article in 1874, and in it he stated that the Sovereigns of Industry was to be dedicated to, and I quote, elevating the character, improving the condition, and as far as possible perfecting the happiness of the laboring classes, end quote, through the establishment of consumer cooperatives. Now, Earl felt that there was exploitation of the workers by the wholesalers and shopkeepers and other middlemen, as he called them. He felt that this was the primary cause of their misery. He went on to say, and I quote again, we propose to have purchasing agencies through which consumers reach the producer direct, without so many needless middlemen. He really hated these middlemen who do nothing to merchandise but add to its cost. We think middlemen have grown rich enough already. Middlemen not only exact a tax from the consumer, but they are responsible for shoddy goods, short waits, and adulterations. We are determined to secure pure goods at lower prices. He really hated those middlemen. The Constitution of the Sovereigns of Industry called for a national, state, and local councils, with the National Council to be composed of 2 representatives from each state. At the peak of the organization in 1875, 101 local councils were reported as having established some form of cooperation, and 46 of these operated stores, 20 making use of the Rochdale system, and another 26 selling commodities at cost to members of the Sovereigns of Industry only. The Sovereigns of Industry even made efforts to cooperate with the patrons of husbandry or grange, including, in at least one case, the joint operation of a cooperative store. Membership was open to all individuals 16 years of age and older. According to the governing law of the organization, called the Declaration of Purpose, membership was not to be constrained by race, sex, nationality, or occupation. Here again, I can keep saying to you, this organization was way ahead of its time. Way ahead of its time when it comes to these kinds of issues. Now, the group was funded by per capita dues of 20 cents per member, each member paying an additional 25 cents initiation fee. Additional funds were to be generated through a $15 fee charged to each organization for its charter. So, just to give you some insight here, 15 cents in 1878 was the equivalent in purchasing power to about $4.62 today. $15 in 1878 was the equivalent in purchasing power to about $4.61 today. The Order of Sovereigns of Industry enjoyed rapid growth, which was centered heavily in New England and the upper Midwest. Sovereigns of Industry claimed to have 40,000 members at their peak year of 1875. 40% of that number was in the state of Massachusetts. The sovereigns of industry had a friendly relationship with the Grange movement. However, the organizations with trade unions tended to be poor. And that's probably because of the fact that trade unions in the United States weren't very strong at that time as it was, and they probably felt that, well, the sovereigns of industry were going to compete with them. Perhaps maybe they should have worked together, let's put it that way. Now, there was an economic downturn beginning in 1873 and running through March of 1879, or depending on the metrics you're using, could have lasted as long as 1896. And this downturn was called the Long Depression, and it was caused by a worldwide price and economic recession. And the Long Depression spelled disaster for the sovereigns of industry. Cash payments to their cooperative stores fell dramatically, causing cash flow difficulties for the local councils behind them. Now, further exacerbating that problem was the fact that many of the sovereigns of industry councils had incompetent or even corrupt management. Oof, right? With its cooperative business model in ruins and membership levels beginning to drop, the Order of Sovereigns of Industry rapidly declined in 1878. The group was formally disbanded in 1880. There you have it, brothers and sisters. The sovereigns of industry. How do you feel about them? Some things I personally gleaned both during my research and even during my presentation. Number one, this group was onto something. Their heart was in the right place, let's be honest, okay? They really wanted to help people, right? And as I keep saying, they were ahead of their time. Race, sex, nationality, and occupation didn't matter, okay? Think of it this way. At a time when race relations weren't the very best in the United States, right? At a time when women's issues, when women were still viewed in many cases as property, or, they weren't even allowed to vote, or at a time when there was a tremendous amount of anti-immigrant sentiment within the United States, this organization allowed everybody into their lodges, into their organizations on an equal footing, right? Even things like occupation didn't matter. Everybody from the street sweeper to the banker could be part of this organization, right? Things like cooperative stores. I mean, this group had everything but insurance. Cooperative stores, right? Long before, think of it this way, there's so many different cooperatives around now. This group was doing it as early as the 1870s, right? Now, here you have it as well. I think we're starting to answer some questions here on Points of Light Radio. This is another group that started during that golden age of fraternalism between 1850 and 1900. But like I said, they were at the very end. Now, I'm noticing that many of those organizations that started at that tail end of that time didn't survive. Now, it was my personal opinion now, after this segment and others before it, is that they didn't have a chance to really establish themselves, right? The field got crowded. They didn't have a chance to establish themselves. And let's be blunt, that Long Depression that started in and around 1878 didn't I mean, it definitely hurt, right? It wouldn't have helped, and it definitely hurt. Okay. And from what I've read, the Long Depression, that particular economic downturn was worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s, the recession of the early 80s, or for that matter, the 2008 financial crisis. It was quite severe, right? And the problem is, as we get further away from it in history, we don't see it for what it really was. We just remember things that we studied. It's not something that you hear a whole lot about in history class in high school, put it that way, right? But I'll close with this, okay? A final question to look at. If the sovereigns of industry had tried to establish themselves in, shall we say, 1937 or 1938, right near the tail end of the Great Depression, when everybody was angry with the banks, when the Great Depression would have been quite fresh in a lot of people's minds, when people were still reaching for help, could they possibly have survived? Right? What do you think? Feel free to leave your opinion on that, right? I'm going to enclose a link to the initiation ritual in the detail section of this podcast so we can have a look at that. But I'm really hoping you enjoyed this, right? But as I always do before I go, I also want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. And I want to see, as I said, some answers to my questions here in the comments section when viewing this on YouTube. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, until we have a chance to fellowship again, just step into and stay in the light.